Hey guys, this is question MM067 of the Maths Methods Sharpen Study Guide. Another graph drawing one. So we've got on the axes below, sketch the graph of f of x equals 4x squared take 2x cubed, where x is an element of -1 to 2. Label any important points, including any endpoints. So, in this case, we don't need to label the turning points. But you'll see that as I draw it. So I've rewritten the question here, okay, so what do we do? So we know that our domain is -1 to 2. What do we need to find? We need to find our y-intercept and our x-intercepts, if there are more than one. So let's start with that. Let's start with our y-intercept. So that occurs when x equals 0. So f of 0 is equal to 0 minus 0, which is 0. So we know that our y-intercept occurs at 0, 0. For our x-intercepts, these occur when y equals 0, which means that 0 equals 4x squared take 2x cubed, which is equal to 2x squared times 2 minus x, which means according to our null factor law, x equals 0 and x equals 2. Now, the important thing to note here is that because this is an x squared on the outside, this x equals 0 is a turning point, and that happens because of this squared here. If that squared was here on the 2 take x, there would be a turning point at x equals 2. So whatever bracket or whatever term the squared is on, that's where the turning point occurs. So we know that there's a turning point at 0, 0 at x equals 0 here. So it's going to touch that graph and then come back off. And we know that there's an x-intercept at 2. So firstly, we need to figure out if this is within our domain. -1 to 2. -1 to 2. Yes, 2 is within our domain, and it's actually the endpoint here. So our first endpoint is going to be 2, 0. And we know that it's going to touch the graph here at 0, 0. But we actually need to figure out if this graph is coming down like this, like that, or up like this. And the way that we do that is to look at which coefficient of x cubed is negative. So if the coefficient of x cubed is negative, it's going to come down like this and continue down. Or if it's positive, it's going to come up like this and continue up. So because it's negative here, the coefficient of x cubed, it's going to come down. And just be careful, because some students may get caught with this part here, because usually the cubed term comes first, but because the squared term is first, that's not the coefficient that we need to use, it's the one in front of the cube that we need to recognize. So we know that there's a turning point at 0, 0. We know that there's an x-intercept at 2, 0, which is also our endpoint because of this 2 up here. And now we need to find our endpoint at -1. So we need to do f of -1 is equal to 4 times -1 squared, take away 2 times -1 cubed, which equals 4 times +1, which is 4, take away -2, which is +2. So this becomes 6. So we know that our endpoint is -1, 6, which occurs up here. So now we know our endpoint, we know our turning point, we know our x-intercept, which is also 0, 0 as well, and our y-intercept. So now we can draw it. So our graph comes down like this, has a turning point at 0, 0, comes up like this, and then stops at 2, 0. Now, like I mentioned before, we don't need to label this turning point because in the version that you have, this will actually be saying, this sentence will say label axis intercepts and endpoints. So you won't need to label this turning point. But this here is 0, 0 because that's still an axis intercept regardless of whether it's a turning point or not. And this endpoint is -1, 6. And that's it. That is our graph. And please don't do what I'm doing and use a pen for this. Use a pencil, because if you stuff it up, then you can rub it out and restart. I should have used a pencil as well. So do what I say, not what I do. That's the answer. And it's 3 marks. So as with any graph, you start with 3 marks and they take away marks based on what you don't include. But that's it.